the top Greek guy at Harvard, Gregory Nagy, put out a book discussing Sappho's poems. Sappho wrote about 700 BC, and here's what it says. In the wedding songs of Sappho, the god Ares is the model for the bridegroom, who is explicitly described as equal to Ares. That leads us to the question of who might that bride be? Again, these are Nagy's words. Correspondingly, there are many instances of implicit equations between the generic bride and the goddess Aphrodite. In Sappho Song 112, for example, the bridegroom is said to be infused with the divine charisma of Aphrodite, evidently by way of his direct contact with the bride. So if you can imagine that, somehow this Ares-like figure is being infused with power or glory or something, light, call it, from Aphrodite. Where have we heard that before? So in various books I've discussed the Persian goddess of the planet Venus, and here's how she's described. She legitimated the enthronement of the king, providing him with his charisma. Again, this is a universal motif. This is found on everywhere for all practical purposes. The planet Venus imbues the king or her lover, her bridegroom, with his charisma, his glory, his power. Back to Mesopotamia. The love songs portray Inanna, the life force of the teeming people, passing the divine influx onward to her spouse, the king. We'll go back to the sacred marriage ceremony again. And here's a specific quote from a different marriage ceremony. You, O Mistress Inanna, you have handed over to him your power as is due to the king, and Dumuzi causes a radiant brilliance to burst out for you. And one of my favorite scholars, a gal named Brushweiler, was talking about this passage, and here's what she said. This passage is interesting due to the way in which, in the context of the sacred marriage, the luminous essence of the goddess is passed over to the king, who is identified for the occasion with Dumuzi. Again, it's the exact same thing we just read about with Aphrodite. So all of you that are familiar with Dave's work, we've been talking about this image for 20 years, I suppose, where we imagine Mars being the inner orb there, surrounded by the glory of the planet Venus. The Odyssey we're all familiar with. Ares and Aphrodite are caught in making love surreptitiously, and they're caught in this net. And so Homer turns it into an act of comedy by asking, would you, despite all these ropes holding you tight and embarrassing you in front of the other guys, would you like to lie in bed with Aphrodite? And I think Hermes answers, oh yes, even if there were 3 times as many fastenings and all the gods and goddesses were watching. And so then a commentator called Lucian wrote this: all that he, Homer, hath said of Venus and Mars, his passion, is also manifestly composed from no other source than this science, astrology. Indeed, it is the conjuncture of Venus and Mars that creates the poetry of Homer. Not surprisingly, here's the top scholar on Aphrodite's cult. Originally, the goddess Aphrodite had nothing to do with the planet. The link was in all probability made as a result of Babylonian influence in the field of astronomy. Okay, all of us, I'm sure, are familiar with the expression tying the knot. It's a proverbial expression for a wedding, and it goes back thousands of years. For example, Virgil in the first sentence there talked about Venus tying the knot. This is a very ancient picture of Inanna holding a knot. And it's called either the ring or the knot of sovereignty, sovereignty meaning kingship. Again, back to a top scholar talking about Ishtar's mythology. Many astral motifs, in fact, are attested. Ishtar's elevation tells us that the god An married her on the urging of the gods and asked her to hold and rule the Tai, Riksu. Tai also means knot. Another recent text found Ishtar as the planet Venus described as Kisru. The word Kisru, however, means a knot or a meteor-like object. An ancient text from about 2900 BC said, when Inanna had tied the lordship with the kingship for this figure, this Sumerian king, she let him exert kingship in Uruk. Again and again and again, Inanna is described as tying on the royal headband or the royal crown. Back to the sacred marriage rite, again and again and again, Inanna is in this text. There's hundreds of lines in this particular text, but on about 10 different occasions, Inanna is said to embrace the king, embrace Dumuzi. And the word used also means to knot, to tie up. From the same text, may the Lord whom you have chosen in your heart, the king, your beloved husband, enjoy long days in your holy and sweet embrace. Again, this embrace meaning a knot. Give him a propitious and famous reign, and give him the righteous headband, headdress, and crown which glorifies his head. I like that quote because it almost ties all three things together. Her tying on the crown, her tying him with the knot, and her giving him kingship. So here's kind of my summary to that. Inanna's embracing or knotting of the king equals his sacred marriage. Inanna's tying or knotting of the royal headband on the king is his investiture with the crown. At the same time, however, her tying on this knot or sexual union with the king turns him into a god. So here's another familiar sign that Dave and I have used hundreds of times. Back to, again, Inanna's knot that symbolized kingship. This is the same sign, or an analogous sign, I guess would be the better way to put it, from ancient Egypt, where there it's the goddess that hands the king this shin bond or shin knot, quote, thereby legitimizing his crown and sovereignty. Does that look familiar? And finally, I'd like to just discuss in passing the greening of the world because it's so important to this sacred marriage that's always associated with fertility. Why would they associate the planet Venus with causing fertility everywhere? Here's back to the sacred marriage theme. The holy embrace, fresh fruits and shoots as she rises from the king's embrace. The flax rises up with her. Everything appears like a glorious garden. So here's what we think things looked like. There was actually a greening of the sky associated with this conjunction. That's where this fertility motif comes from. And again and again and again, you will read that the heavens became greened. Back to the sacred marriage. Of the royal bed on where this marriage was performed, it was called Girin, Girin. The word itself means blossoming, fruitful, shining. So the king again and again is invoked as long may he live on the flowered throne. One of the most ancient symbols of Inanna from, again, prehistoric times was the rosette, this figure here. An eightfold flower-like star. Again, back to one of the top scholars in the world. Another early symbol refers to Inanna, the rosette, which somehow was connected with the sign for star. Already in 1922, Daimel proposed their common origin. My own preliminary investigation of this connection is that the rosette is meant to represent the flower, the earthly counterpart of the star. Evidently, he was unaware that this pictograph is found all around the world. This is an example from Ireland. So, to take away from this speech in summary, I would emphasize that creation was something actually witnessed in prehistoric times. They were extraordinary celestial events involving the planets, witnessed by people all around the globe. The sacred marriage rite commemorated the historical planetary conjunction between prototypical male and female powers. The greening of the world equals a specific phase in the unfolding of the polar configuration. Again, we'll be describing this, I'm sure, for the next 20 years with thousands of parallels. It's so obvious, it's unbelievable. No one's ever seen this before, so far as I'm aware. The garden itself associated with the planet Venus was a celestial place, a celestial structure associated with the prototypical sexual act between Mars and Venus. Is it any wonder that flowers to this day are still associated with marriage, or that rings or bands are still associated with marriage? In our configuration here, the planet Mars has to be in front of Venus. I would suggest to you that you can take that to the bank, that Mars was originally stationed in front of the planet Venus. However, if that's true, virtually every modern astronomical textbook will need wholesale revision. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.